My name is Korey, and my speech is called Ethical Relativism.
Audience 1.
Audience 2.
Audience 3.
Audience 4.
Audience 5.
6.
In 399 BC, a man named Socrates was put on trial by envious citizens of the Athenian democracy. Although he was unfairly found guilty and sentenced to death by poison, Socrates' belief in democracy was so strong that he willingly went to his death by drinking hemlock. Socrates was able to use his death as one last philosophical lesson in axiology. According to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, axiology can be thought of as primarily concerned with classifying what things are good and how good they are. Axiological ethics seeks to explain why we give values to our moral principles and ideas, and if these ideas are even worthy of value. Axiology is concerned with why an ethical principle held by one individual might be considered unethical by another individual. Although Socrates' moral principles and values led him to do what he believed to be the most valiant response to his accuser's verdict, another individual might find Socrates' actions to be completely unethical and even cowardly. To better understand why axiological ethics has conflicting questions of worth, an individual must have a basic understanding of ethical philosophy. In the field of ethics, there are three separate dimensions that interact and sometimes conflict: virtue ethics, consequentialist ethics, and deontological ethics. The field of virtue ethics is concerned with moral character traits and their acquisition. These moral character traits are called virtues. Ethical philosophers have to decide what makes a moral character trait a virtue, and this often leaves room for disagreement. Character traits are often self-conflicting in the balance between virtue and morality. One such example of this conflict is frugality. Benjamin Franklin stated that to be frugal meant to make no expense but to do good to oneself and others, i.e., waste nothing. Philosophers are concerned with when a virtue like frugality becomes a moral. One can hardly read A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens and find Ebenezer Scrooge's frugality to be virtuous. Many ethical codes of conduct are developed in order to find a balance between virtue and immorality. These different ethical codes of conduct represent different schools of thought, and an individual is free to choose a philosophy that most closely matches his own opinion of virtue. The field of virtue ethics leaves much room for other dimensions of thought. Consequentialist ethics seeks to determine how our actions affect the world and the people around us. One form of consequentialist ethics is utilitarianism. Tom Beauchamp, an author on bioethics, says that moral rules are useful in guiding human actions, but they're also expendable when they don't promote utility in a particular context. This argument has been the foundation for many an evil act in the name of the greater good. The minority often becomes marginalized because what is good for the majority is often bad for the minority. Another problem with consequentialist ethics is that time is a continuum, and it may not actually be possible to determine when our actions stop affecting the world around us. Utilitarianism gives opportunity for philosophers to look more logically at right and wrong in a completely different dimension of ethical reasoning. Deontology is concerned with whether an action is right or wrong, and it is often simply expressed as a law of conscience. John Locke was an ethical philosopher, and most of his writings were concerned with deontology. Locke stated that the reason for law was not to abolish or restrain freedom, but to enlarge and preserve it. One conflicting idea held by many is that law is not actually necessary if all individuals possess conscience and believe the same things to be right or wrong. It is clear that ethical decisions cannot be made simply from one ethnocentric viewpoint. The cause for conflict in the field of ethics is a phenomenon known as ethical relativism. Ethical relativism means that whether an action is right or wrong is always relative to the person considering it. This makes the study of ethics systemic, with the individual, society, and environment working as elements. These elements can interact with each other in agreement, or they can cause conflict. The reason for this conflict is that ethical decisions are not one-dimensional. They must be looked at and weighed by their moral, consequential, and deontological aspects. Thank you guys very much.